everyone, and welcome to lesson 1.5. Today's lesson is going to be the impact of globalization. And by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to do the following. You should be able to describe the impact that globalization had on states, which this means independent countries and the like, private groups such as companies and corporations, the impact on culture, as well as the impact on global political interaction. So, the first impact that we're going to look at is the impact that globalization has on states. So, we're talking about the impact that globalization has on foreign countries or countries in by themselves. And there are three different impacts: economic, political, and cultural. When you look at economic impacts, one of the biggest impacts is that there are free movement of capital, products, business ideas, and greater access to cheap labor. What this means is, for example, American businesses being in China, German cars being built in Mexico. For example, Honda cars are built largely for Americans, are largely built in Kentucky. So it's a Japanese car built in the United States using American labor. So that's a perfect example. There's a free movement of capital, products, business ideas. That's why it's very easy for, ideas that have been developed in Europe and in Asia and in other places to come to the United States to help people come together to develop these things. So there's freer movement of information and products. Secondly, in terms of politics, when you look at politics, given citizens greater access to powerful groups outside of their own country, so like human rights abuses are documented by the United Nations or the Red Cross. So when you have these other organizations that are not related to your country coming in, it really puts the political issues of your country into the forefront. So globalization kind of, if you do something wrong, everybody knows about it. So it does kind of cause countries to think a little bit differently politically when they're talking about globalization. And then lastly, culturally, it gives citizens access to rights, norms, and beliefs and expectations that are not normally found in their own country. So they're heavily impacted by Hollywood. So this is why, a lot of people who are conservative, they get really upset with Hollywood because their culture is changing, or something that Hollywood produces is offensive in their culture. And so the world is trying to live up to the expectations that are being created by Hollywood. And so globalization does impact the culture of the country as well. And it depends on who you ask. Some people say more positively, some people say it's negative. Now we're going to shift our focus to the impact that globalization has on private groups. And we're going to talk specifically in this slide about economic and cultural impacts that globalization has on private groups. So first of all, economically and culturally, what this does, globalization impacts national as well as multinational corporations, and it increases their trade and investment opportunities, and it spreads their business ideas. So it's very, very similar to how it impacts countries as a whole, and the reason being is because our entire world really is run by the capitalist system. So even though, we're talking about private groups and corporations and things like that, economically and culturally, they do, globalization impacts both the private company, corporation, as well as the nation kind of similarly, because everything centers around a capitalistic system. And one of the best examples that we have of this is this gentleman named Jack Ma. And Jack Ma was born in China, so he came to the United States, and as a result of his life here and his study here, he was inspired to create Alibaba, which is the company that he founded and created, and it provides individual and business sales throughout the internet. So he's created a multi-billion-dollar company. And so as a result, he is one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. So he is a great success story of showing how globalization, he comes from China and then moved to the United States to create a capitalist, company, and now is a one of the wealthiest people in the world, and he's a living example of how globalization has impacted his company economically and culturally. Now, continuing the impact on private groups, let's take a look at how globalization impacts corporations and private groups politically. One of the things that it does is that it brings international aid services and pressure groups. So that's how globalization has changed private groups politically, in the fact that if a company or corporation is doing something wrong, it brings international aid services to that country that this company has been doing poor things with. It also adds in pressure groups. Here's some examples. Politicians in Malaysia, they have been working with the World Economic Forum to bring global awareness to political abuses in Malaysia. So they've actually used, this is, you know, a non kind of political entity, but it's bringing abuses to this. So it's kind of like we're talking about the world economy, but then these politicians from Malaysia are bringing awareness to their plight. And so it's kind of making Malaysia, you know, hopefully forcing them to clear up and address any abuses. So they're using this stage, if you will, to bring about talk, if you will, about political abuses that are happening in Malaysia. Another example is Save the Children Foundation. It brings awareness to hunger issues around the globe. So it depends on, you know, this is not a political organization at all, but of course it is an organization that's trying to bring political awareness to hunger for children and just people in general. Next, let's take a look at the impact that globalization has on culture. And of course, there's three different subsets: economic, political, and cultural. And so in terms of impact on culture, let's look at economically. It gives people different cultures access to ideas, products, and services from other cultures. So it's, you know, multicultural, if you will. And so it's, you know, I'm not used to this particular culture, but, you know, because I'm trading and corresponding with these companies in other countries, I'm getting access to their culture because I'm going to have to learn the different words that they say or the different mannerisms that they say. We're also starting to see restaurants from local areas coming into other parts of the world, as well as social media is making it very, very easy for us to keep tabs on things economically. For example, you know, all of the flags that are in my classroom, I purchased them personally, and were all made in India. And actually, I was able to watch them be made and even watch them being able to be shipped. So there are products that were not even made on this continent that are hanging in my classroom. Politically, globalization impacts by requiring the promotion of cultural norms on a global platform. So we're eventually starting to get where we might start to see an earth culture developing. I mean, you know, where it's going to be a human culture because, you know, all of us have different cultures and different norms and things like that, but eventually we're going to start to see, you know, cultural norms mixing so that we can all do business and talk to each other. In terms of UN Refugee Agency, it encourages women and empowers them. This is an example of how globalization has impacted political culture in countries where the UN Refugee Agency, it, you know, helps women who are refugees, but it also teaches and helps other places around the world to try to empower women so that they can get out of poverty. And then, you know, the cultural impact of, you know, globalization on culture is that the world's culture is becoming more homogenized, like I just said. There's an increase, unfortunately, of Western culture around the world, but, you know, as a result of that, it is becoming more and more homogenized. And lastly, the impact that globalization has on global political interaction. So how has globalization changed how nations respond and talk to each other? This is the question, basically what this is. So let's look at it economically. Well, first of all, globalization impacts global political interaction economically by reducing the potential for armed conflict. Here's a perfect example. Both Japan and China have had tense diplomatic relations, as you can see right here. You know, these are all these islands between China and South Korea and Japan and Taiwan, and this whole area is just a big hot mess of, you know, drama. But Japan and China need each other. That's why, you know, this with China, I'm not really worried about it. We both need each other. I mean, don't mind what we need each other. So this is this is how globalization is a good thing. There's a reason why we haven't been to war with each other, because China needs American products. They need us to buy all the stuff. So, politically impacts. It impacts by forcing states to cooperate with IGOs and NGOs. So politically, you know, countries can't just do what they used to do anymore. They have to kind of work with these corporations because in order to be politically and economically viable, you're going to have to play nice with these corporations, and that's what IGOs and NGOs kind of do. There's the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and it argues that women's rights should be a central policy. for countries wishing to improve their development. So the United Nations has put a tremendous effort on trying to advance women's rights around the world. But the question here, and this is just a rhetorical question, is this ethical? How ethical is this? And the reason being is because improving women's rights may have benefits. And I think, everybody psychologically and politically and ethnically, culturally, we all can understand that, improving women's rights have tremendous benefits. But what do we do when it comes into conflict with local culture and customs? And so this is where that definite balance has to be achieved between those two concepts. But again, that's a question that geopolitical scientists are asking and trying to answer today. And there you have it. Lesson 1.5 has been completed. So the impact of globalization. Can you describe the impact globalization has on states, private groups, culture, and global political interaction? If you can, pat yourself on the back. You did an amazing job. At this point, find any activity for lesson 1.5, complete that, and then move on to 1.6. Thank you so much and have a great day.